Welcome back to the Lights Out podcast, bedtime stories for boys and girls around the world. Good evening, boys and girls. Are you ready for bed? Are you all wrapped up, snuggled up, and ready for another Lights Out bedtime story? Good, because you're in for a treat tonight, because we have part 2 of The Girl Who Imagined Her Mum and Dad Back by Martyn Kenneth. And part 2 is called The Cereal Box. When Sarah woke up, there was something that didn't feel right that morning. And it was because her mum and dad had not come back home from the night before. She started to get scared, even more than excited now, and it was quite difficult to turn any of that fear into excitement, because this was the first time her mum and dad had never come back home when she'd woken up in the morning. She stepped into the kitchen and took out the cereal box and got the last bit of milk from the fridge. It seemed a bit smelly because it had been in the fridge for about a week, but not too smelly that she couldn't drink it or pour it on a cereal. She made herself some cereal, and all that she could have was a nice cup of warm water. And she thought, well, maybe, just maybe, my mum and dad had got stuck because it had been raining all night. Or maybe they were hiding somewhere, and maybe they were going to surprise me. Or maybe they'd come in, but just come back out again. And so she waited. And waited, and waited, and being the first day of the summer holidays, she had lots of homework to do, and so she started on that homework, and she was also free to watch TV, and so she occupied her mind with homework and TV, and homework and TV. And she would go into the kitchen sometime and look into the cupboards to get some snacks. And she knew where her mum had hid all the snacks that she couldn't eat. And she got the yellow stool again and reached up high onto the top shelf, and she got a packet of crisps. And when she was feeling a bit hungry, she reached up even higher and got a packet of candy. And she waited and waited and waited, and she tried really hard to turn some of the fear and scarediness into excitement. But as time went on, it got harder and harder to be excited. And it got very difficult to keep down the fear and the worry of where her mum and daddy might be. And then it started to get dark again. And so she closed the curtains and she turned on all the lights in the house. She didn't want to see the dark because it just made her even more scared. And she also turned on the TV, and she turned on the radio, and she put on her favourite CD and turned up the music very loud. There was nothing for dinner for Sarah that night because her mummy and daddy had not prepared anything the night before because they were not there. And so she ate the last bag of chips for dinner, for tea, and she brushed her teeth, and with tears rolling down her cheeks, she put on her pajamas and went to bed and cried herself to sleep, hoping that Mum and Dad might come back in the middle of the night. And she woke up, and with tears that had dried on her cheeks and a little bit of salty taste running down her lips, because she'd been crying in her sleep, she jumped up and she ran through to the living room. The lights in the house were on and the curtains were closed. She didn't know what time it was, so she flung open the curtains, but it was still dark outside. She looked at the clock. It was 4 a.m. She'd woken up in the middle of the night. She ran back into her bedroom and pulled the covers over her head and hid there and went back to sleep. And when she got up the next morning, she ran back into the living room, hoping to see her mum and dad sitting on the sofa. She opened the curtains, and it was daytime. It was. And she looked right down there from the top of the tower at the bustling streets and all the cars and the traffic and the hundreds and thousands and millions of people walking around. And she couldn't help but think, where is my mum and dad? She couldn't get out of the house. She thought about running down and trying to get into the elevator, but she thought, even as brave as she was, the thought of trying to figure out the number on the door and walking past all the doors into the hallway and getting into the dark and scary elevator. To go where? Where would she go? And what would happen to her if she did try and go by herself? And how would she get back in, even if she went down, because she didn't have a key? And so she stayed in the house. She had nowhere to go. And his family, you see, because they were a modern family, they didn't have a landline or a telephone in the house. Her dad had a mobile phone, and her mummy had a mobile phone, but the girl didn't have one. So she couldn't call anyone. She couldn't speak to anyone. She didn't have a grandma or a grandpa, and she didn't have many friends, even if she did have a phone. So, what could she do, living there in the middle of a city in a tall tower? Well, the girl almost decided, she'd have to live there by herself, at least until the mummy and daddy came back. That day was quite tough for the little girl, a little bit exciting, but mostly tough. And 2 days later, it was still the summer holidays, and the school was closed, and it was a Tuesday, I think. She poured the last couple of cornflakes into the bowl, which she had without milk, because there wasn't any milk anymore, and she had a cup of water, because that's all that was left in the house. No more food. And now the girl, Sarah, started to feel a lot scared. And after a breakfast of one cornflake, the girl started to get increasingly hungry. And now this feeling of hunger started to reach the size of the feeling of fear. And inside her stomach, she was both hungry and scared. And the fear of the hunger started to crawl up her stomach and right through her throat and into her brain. And she thought she was going dizzy. And she didn't know whether it was her fear or the hunger. And when dinner time came, her belly was saying, "Where's my food? Where's my dinner? Where's my noodles? Where's my rice and soup? And any chocolate or something?" And when Sarah thought about the chocolate, she couldn't get the thought out of her mind. She put on her pajamas and brushed her teeth again. She had no more tears left, and all that she could think about was a chocolate. And if she could only have one piece of chocolate, that's all that she would need. And she went to bed that night again, and she dreamed about chocolate and cereal. And when she got up, she was determined to keep the routine of the pattern of just daily routine of habits of cereal and homework and TV and YouTube. And so she sat there on a chair, and she got the bowl of cereal. She got the bowl in front of her, and a spoon, and the empty box of cereal, and she sat there at her breakfast table, and she looked at the empty box of cereal. She couldn't shed a tear as much as she wanted to. She couldn't even cry, and her belly was now really growling and grumbling, saying, "Feed me, feed me," and her head was spinning and dizzier and dizzier and dizzier. She had fear and hunger and pain, and there was not a piece of excitement left in her. She'd lost that a long time ago, and so she closed her eyes, and she thought about a piece of chocolate, and she closed them so tightly and squeezed her eyes so much, a tiny little tear came out, and it rolled down her cheek, and her head started to spin as sparks started to fly around inside her head, and she screamed, she banged the table, and she opened up her eyes, and there, through the tears, she thought she was seeing things, but how could she? It was a piece of chocolate inside the cereal bowl. She shook her head and rubbed her eyes again, and she reached into the bowl with her fingers and touched it, and it was real. It was a real piece of chocolate. She picked it up, and still with her eyes unclosed, she put the piece of chocolate in her mouth, and her whole body lit up. It was real. The chocolate was real, and the feeling of smooth milk chocolate whirling around her mouth rushed right to her brain, and erased all the fear and hunger right there in that second. And the excitement bounced back. I am here. She jumped up from the table, the chocolate and the saliva running down her chin. She danced around the house. She had endless energy for the rest of the day, even until it got dark at night. Because of that one tiny little piece of chocolate, she couldn't even sleep until the middle of the night. She didn't want to brush her teeth because she didn't want to lose all the chocolate between the teeth. She licked her lips and tried to get her tongue in between the cracks of her teeth, and even though she'd not been able to floss or brush her teeth, like her mummy and dad tried to tell her to do every night, she did get the floss and tried to get the chocolate out and just to eat it. But when the teeth started to bleed, she put it back and said, "That's enough. I'm going to have to stop, because that's enough for tonight." And that night she went to bed with a smile on her face. She'd forgotten about her mummy and daddy for a blink of an eye, until she woke up as hungry as ever the next day. You see, a piece of chocolate just won't do. I think that piece of chocolate, although it had given her a lot of energy, it had also taken away a lot when she was asleep, and so she went slumping and stumbling back to the table. She put down the bowl again, and the spoon, and the box of cereal. "I can't live on chocolate," she said. "I need some cereal. I need some milk." And she was very angry now. And she didn't know where the anger came from, but it bubbled up and boiled up, and she seemed very, very angry. But then she had a razor-sharp thinking, and so she closed her eyes again. She squeezed her eyelids so tightly, and with a focus like a laser. She said, "I want some cereal. I'm so hungry." And as she squeezed her eyes tightly, she banged the table again. And when she opened her eyes, there in the bowl was a piece of cereal. She closed her eyes again. She squeezed them and thought about it. And she opened her eyes after banging the table again, and there was 3 bits of cereal. "What about milk?" she thought. She closed her eyes again, and tears rolled down her cheek as she screamed, and she slammed the table with the palm of her hand. And when she opened them, her eyes, in the bowl were 6 pieces of cereal and a little dribble of milk. She took a spoon and gobbled them all up and danced around the room again. And I thought, how amazing is this? Whew. Then after a few minutes, she started to wonder what would happen if she wanted more than just cereal. What would happen if she wanted something else? And what were the limits to this, she thought, and thought as the tears dried on her cheeks. That's the end of part 2 of Sarah, the Girl Who Imagined Her Mum and Dad Back, by Martyn Kenneth. Look out for the next part 3 tomorrow, maybe. So please hit subscribe, like, thumbs up, whatever you do, to get the next chapter, the next part of this story, which is amazing. Here on the Lights Out podcast, bedtime stories for boys and girls around the world. Good night.